raise of hands, who in this room either uses toll-free for messaging or provides toll-free messaging to their customers? Okay, keep those hands up. Keep the hands up if you're familiar with the Somos TSS registry. Okay, just a few more. Keep your hand up if you can explain to the person next to you why and what the TSS does and the value that it adds. Okay. All right, so that's why we're here today. We're going to share with you, Bill LaRuffa, our Senior Director of Business Development at Somos, is going to walk through what the TSS does, why it's there, how it works, the value that it adds. Tina Donaldson, who's VP of Strategy for Netnumber, is going to walk through how we work with Netnumber in the toll-free messaging space. I'm Dave Stewart from Somos. A little bit about Somos, just to set the context of why we're doing what we're doing. So many of you know us for the toll-free registry. Somos also runs 2 other contracts for the FCC. We run the North American Numbering Plan and the Reassigned Number Database. In addition to that, we have a portfolio of commercial services which is focused around bringing trusted number information to the communication space to build trust and keep fraud out. We do this through our operations in the US. We also have a subsidiary out of London called XConnect. They provide that similar information on a global level. Importantly, to understand how the texting for toll-free works, you've got to understand how the voice side of things work. We just discussed how they are different, but there's a lot of similarities, and to Shree's point, while they should be treated differently, there are some commonalities across there. These are some highlights and some data points on how Somos has been running the toll-free registry for voice for the past 20 years. It's worth noting here, we just peaked over 45 million numbers for the first time last month, and we have over 400 responsible organisations. Responsible organisations are unique to the toll-free space. They're basically our distributors. They are the TNSP, the telephone number service provider for the toll-free space. They're unique. They're not all communication service providers. In fact, many of our REST-borgs solely provision toll-free numbers for their customers without any communication services. It's important to keep that in mind as we go into this in more detail. So I'm not a grandfather, but I do like to tell a story. So I'll try my best. And this story starts in June of 2018. The FCC had a declaratory ruling for texting and toll-free. And their declaratory ruling basically said 2 things. Before you text enable a toll-free number, you must make sure that it is in the voice registry. Sounds logical, and it's difficult to imagine, but back then, toll-free numbers were being text-enabled that had no voice registration. The second thing that the declaratory ruling did was to say you have to make sure it is the same end subscriber that is text-enabling the number that has it for voice. Again, it sounds logical, but back then, these things were happening. People were text-enabling toll-free numbers with really no rights to them. So Somos reached out to partners in the ecosystem, Netnumber being a primary one. We also worked with many of the messaging service providers, and we said, how do we make this work? And I think this is a great case study where competitors and partners alike got together and figured out a way for the appropriate amount of friction, not none, some, the appropriate costs to be compliant with regulation, but more importantly, to secure the trust of toll-free numbers for the subscribers, but also for their customers. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill LaRuffa. He's going to walk you through what the TSS registry does, how we work with Netnumber and other players in the ecosystem to make sure that the rights to text enabling a toll-free number are secure and are authenticated all the way through. So Bill.
I always think the best thing after a regulatory discussion is call flows, right? So never fails. So where I'd like to start is a sunny day scenario of the toll-free SMS call flow. And due to my rudimentary PowerPoint skills, we're going to keep it very flat and very simple. So we have our messaging providers who have their toll-free customers where they are providing platforms, messaging services. That messaging provider needs to terminate that call to the recipient or that SMS, and that is going to be through the MNOs. Historically, there was always messaging gateways in between the messaging provider and the terminating carrier. And we heard from David's keynote this morning that more and more message providers are getting direct binds to those carriers today. So if we were here last year, that wouldn't have been a thing. It would always have been on the gateway side. So that is a very flat look at an A to B messaging flow. But behind the scenes, a lot is happening. And what needs to happen is the messaging provider themselves needs to do a layer of validation and enablement for this toll-free number. And where this starts is within the TSS registry. So the TSS registry really has two separate functions. The first one is validating that that toll-free number is indeed available and enabled for voice. That's the only way that it could be text-enabled. The second part, and this is really specific nuance to the toll-free side, is the RTU validation. So what the TSS is doing is it's looking at the chain of custody and ownership of the toll-free number to ensure that the messaging provider has the authority to enable this toll-free number. And what we do is we'll reach out to the RESTborgs, if it's a different RESTborg, and we allow the RESTborgs the opportunity to accept or decline that enablement. Now, the second part, after the validation is done within the TSS registry, is the NNSR. And this is where the actual enablement and the provisioning of the routing happens. And Tina's going to bring us and walk us through that after this. The other point that I'd like to make is what the TSS also does is we are monitoring that toll-free number. Meaning, if that toll-free number was enabled, everything went through, it's sending SMSs, that toll-free number is returned back to the spare pool. We are monitoring that to ensure and then tell the NNSR that this number can no longer send text because it is no longer voice enabled. So the three main parts of that are within the TSS registry. The other point that I want to make sure that is clear is that customers have the option today on where they would like to do the provisioning. We have message providers that come directly to the TSS registry. The registry does the validation and passes that information seamlessly over to the NNSR. There are customers today that provision directly into the NNSR, and what the NNSR does is before it establishes the routing criteria, it dips into the TSS registry to do that level of validation. So I want to make sure we're clear on that. To dive into a little more deeper on the NNSR point, I'm going to bring up Tina Donaldson, VP of Strategy for Netnumber. Thanks. This is a pointer and that goes next.
Is this one? Yep. Thank you guys for having me. I think that in the last year or so, there's been a lot of confusion on what Somos do, what's Netnumber do. And so I thought it'd be interesting to just explain how North American telecom messaging actually works. So there are two different types of routing. One is the industry messaging routing, and that's specific to mobile carriers, ICVs, MVNOs. About 20 years ago, the industry came to Netnumber. They were doing a lot of acquisitions of their own, and they were trying to map and realize, like, what properties do I own, what do I not? And so they had issues internally routing themselves. So they came to Netnumber and said, hey, can you just roll these up and pay attention to this so we don't actually have to say this one's live, this one we got rid of, et cetera. And so this was sort of how the NNID was born, which is the Netnumber ID. So all mobile messaging traffic is routed inter-carrier and even intra-carrier, depending on if they're an MVNO or what they've acquired, through an NNID. It all rolls up into one NNID. And then about 15 years ago, or so ago, I guess, I was at Google at the time, and Google Voice, one of the big things that we were looking to do is text-enabled landline numbers. So we worked with industry to figure out specific, and this is just me personally, to figure out how we could text-enable landline numbers so that they performed and behaved like mobile texting. And so that was sort of born of the NNSR, and now the NNSR has provisioners in there that are CLEC, CPaaS, aggregators, UCaaS, cable companies. I mean, there's a lot of things that direct the routing through this NNID. There's over 200 million numbers in the NNSR. It is the authoritative registry for text-enabling 10-digit, toll-free, VoIP, MVNO, all of these here. But if you look here, Somos is also a provisioner. So there is nothing truly different between how you provision a long code and a toll-free number, because I know there's been a lot of confusion. But what is very important is what they addressed, is that making sure that it is active and it is live and it's the right to use is there on the back end. So that's something that we put in place there. The one thing about the NNSR, what's really interesting is that because everything is routed through an NNID, there is no such thing as spoofing like they have in voice, because there is no one authoritative registry for the number. So it has to, the Netnumber the NNID is married to the telephone number. They cannot have multiple, and it is the authoritative registry of who owns it. So with that said, I hope that clears up what's Somos, what's Netnumber. I mean, all provisioning needs to have an NNID, and we work together to make sure that there's right to use. So with that, I hope I cleared it up, because there's been a lot of confusion. So Dave, if you want to take it from there.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Tina and Bill, for that. In the spirit of brevity, we're going to keep it short. As David said this morning, you're probably going to walk away and remember maybe one or two things from this presentation. I would ask if there is one or two things you do take away from this. A couple of things. Collaboration across the ecosystem is a common theme. We talk about it every time we get together, and then we tend to go off our separate ways. I like to look at this model as an example of where that has worked. It has been effective. It's been in place now for over 6 years, and we've done it with partners that we compete with in other areas. We found common ground and common value in doing that. Secondly, toll-free is a unique ecosystem. There is the responsible organisations, there's a per number provisioning, and there's an ability for us to go down that chain of custody that Bill talked about and validate that the enterprise that's text enabling that number has the right to use of that number. We monitor the state of those in real time and make sure that those records are stayed current always. So I think there's some lessons in here for all of us to take away. I hope this has been helpful, as Tina said, to clarify some points on how we work with Netnumber, how our roles are different, but how we work together. And hopefully that's adds some clarity and some points to think about going forward. So with that, I will thank you all and enjoy the rest of the show. Quick shout out to Dario. Congratulations, Susan. Thanks for a great show and the team pulling this together.